geopolitics. Now, geopolitics further assists the nation to lay down its interest. Sometimes, while laying down these interests, there may be a clash of interest with your neighboring nations. And it is quite natural that in case of country like India, our own share of ups and downs and issues of territorial claims with China as well as India. So that is one part of geopolitics. Now, how do you address the concerns of your geopolitical level? Well, here is where geostrategy comes into play. The geostrategic points are what nations identify, and the basis of what they identify as the geostrategic points, they build further upon it. Here, it becomes imperative to say that geostrategy has two important tools. Firstly, the military force, and second is diplomacy. So that's how nations generally utilize their geostrategy. Apart from geostrategy, today you have terms like geoeconomics and geotechnology, because economics as well as technology have become important tools by which a nation can meet its national interest and project itself at a global platform. When you put geostrategy, geotechnology, geoeconomics together, it becomes the grand strategy of a nation. And that is what nations look forward. Today, when we talk of Indian Ocean region, there are a number of major and minor powers which are there. Each of them is important in its own way and has a lot of contribution for engaging in economic activity, security concerns, and many other facets. So today, my objective is to talk about various important powers which are playing or have interest in the Indo-Pacific region. Also to cover some of the minor powers which independently may not be so strong but are equally valuable. Then the entire focus of the talk will be India-centric, meaning that we are going to draw out implications or what is there for India per se when we talk of geostrategy of the Indo-Pacific region. And also I have made an attempt to ensure that much of the happenings which have taken place in the last few months, the latest issues are brought on table for discussion or, they're covered in the talks. So to begin with, Indo-Pacific region was important, has been important. But suddenly in last few months, there is a re-emphasis being given. Everybody is talking of, the epicenter of activities turning to Indo-Pacific region. So here it becomes important that what are the events which have taken place in the last few months and why this trigger has happened. Well, to note, interestingly, it is Afghanistan. So when we talk of geostrategy, perhaps the placing of the map may not be appropriate. So with this, I would talk for a few minutes about Afghanistan and region west of India to talk about, their importance and their connectivity towards the Indo-Pacific region. On 30th of August 2021, the American forces did a complete withdrawal from Afghanistan, a nation which they were at war or engaged with from last 20 years. And suddenly, with the collapsed governance in Afghanistan, the Talibans were back. Now, the international community called various issues were flagged by the community, stating that it is an entire American failure. Somebody said that, America has made a paradigm shift towards more important issues which required to be addressed. But the bottom line is that Americans have left Afghanistan. Does this situation exonerate America from issues in Afghanistan? Well, America reserves the right to, monitor activities, especially of terror-oriented activities in Afghanistan, and reserves its right to strike. Now, here it is interesting to note that now America does not have bases close to Afghanistan. So today, much of the drone flights which take place or are operated by the Americans take off from Bahrain and they come to Afghanistan. Now that's a long route. They have to detour Iran, and the consequences militarily are not in favor. Therefore, for America to continue a reasonable amount of face-saving monitoring in Afghanistan, it becomes quite natural for them to have a base nearby. Here is where Pakistan comes into play. Now, from last few months, there have been silent whispers regarding whether Pakistan would provide its bases to the American forces. Pakistan on its side said that we had our own share of experience, and probably as time goes, we may not accommodate this American request. Now, let us see beyond the American and the Pakistani relationship. How does Afghanistan affect Pakistan? 20 years back, Afghanistan was seen as a strategic depth by Pakistan. Their intelligence agency was considered to be the architect of creating Taliban. Today, as things stand, much of the Taliban which are in Afghanistan are not directly under the control of Pakistan agencies. Pakistan has its own share of problems at hand. It is with a struggling economy. Today, the World Bank has given them a deadline that they need to start thinking of improving investments. So there are economic challenges which Pakistan faces. In such circumstances, it has got limited scope to get directly engaged with the issues in Afghanistan. Now, point three is regarding immigrants. The moment Afghanistan was destabilized, a large number of immigrants have moved into Pakistan. So this is the third concern that Pakistan is facing. Now, with economy which is fractured, with issue of immigrants and having least amount of control on the Taliban who are in governance in Afghanistan, the possibility of a repeat of what we saw 20 years back may not happen by the textbook. Now, let us talk a bit about the Talibans in Afghanistan. They are with a challenge, and this challenge is firstly to find legitimacy in the international community. One, for which they have been making a lot of promises. Two, within Afghanistan itself, there are areas of major conflict. Today in Afghanistan, we have Al-Qaeda, we have ISIS, we have tribal leaders. So Afghanistan is into fragments as far as power centrism is concerned. So the Taliban have a long distance to walk before they will be able to become legitimate rulers or controllers of Afghanistan. Having said this about this situation, let us see the other powers which are influenced or affected of happenings in Afghanistan. Like, for instance, China. As far as China is concerned, it has been spending a reasonable amount of financial, economic activity-oriented investments in Afghanistan. They have secured a lot of mineral resources in Afghanistan. So therefore, in their economic module, Afghanistan is important. Not only for its resources, but also with the fact that it provides China an alternative route to make access into Central Asia and further to many other areas. So that is why Afghanistan matters to China. The next issue of concern for the Chinese, as far as Afghanistan is concerned, is regarding their own area of Xinjiang province. The Muslim population of Xinjiang, that is the Uyghurs, have ever past wherein they had affinity with the militant outfits in Afghanistan. Today, China is fearful of the fact that the outpour of happenings in Afghanistan may come to their own territory. So, keeping that as a threat, they are looking for overseas base, and they have secured one in Tajikistan. Now, the base in Tajikistan, as far as the Chinese are concerned, is primarily an arrangement between governments to work closely with the Afghan problems. So that is the cover-up story. But then many sources reveal that Chinese PLA boots are on ground. So that's an area of concern. So now let's talk also about India. As far as India is concerned, India maintained a policy for quite some time that there is no good and bad terrorism. So, as far as terrorists are concerned, we would not be negotiating with the terrorist. But as things stand today in Afghanistan, the Taliban are in control. So, we are left with very limited leverage whether we intend to speak to them or we decide not to speak to them. So India is primarily doing wait and watch. And they want to see whether the promises the Talibans are making, would they stand by those promises? One. Point two, that India has also opened doors of track to diplomacy, wherein we are trying to engage with Afghanistan, and we need to. Why Afghanistan is important? Firstly, when China created the Gadar port in Pakistan to counter activities in Gadar port, we invested in Chabar port, that is somewhere in Iran. Now, the connectivity of the port in Iran today has road connectivity with Afghanistan. And this entire project was initiated by India, considering that it will have a leg on ground, and accordingly the north-south corridor and access to other countries in Europe could be made through this channel. So entire project that India tried to work for so long would get adversely affected. This is India's one of the concern. The other concern that India faces is that in the past, India experienced terror activities on its soil, that is Jammu and Kashmir, with militant outfits which were being supported by Afghanistan through Pakistan, of course. So, will what happened in the early 2000 happen back again in 2021 and beyond? That is one question which troubles the Indian authorities. How future unfolds is an issue which we will see as time crosses. Now, after covering much of what this, Afghan dynamics has brought, and the focus of America shifting from Afghanistan to Indo-Pacific, let us also take one occurrence within the Western sector, Western region of India, which probably counterbalances this entire paradigm shift argument. So, let me take your attention to the Trump administration. During the Trump administration, there were various accusations against President Trump regarding the handling of foreign policy. And as a superpower, much of their decisions at the international level were put under question, under scanner. But one good thing that Trump was able to achieve was the Abraham Accord. What is Abraham Accord is that the Israel and UAE, which have very different religious affinity and which probably were not in talking terms or having any major relation, were brought in table, and an accord was signed where UAE, Israel, and America agreed to work together. And with this, new doors and new opportunities have opened up in this region. Now, in 2020 December, idea was propagated in the intellectual fraternity, saying that if one more partner, indicating that one more partner to be India, if it happens to join this particular grouping, then we may perhaps have a new Quad in West Asia with India, US, UAE, and Israel. So perhaps the government of India did pick up this thought process, and we have moved a little closer to working on this line. I would draw your attention to the fact that on 17th October to 21st October this year, the External Affairs Minister was in Israel for his 3-day visit, where ministries and representatives of all these 4 governments were present, not only for a naval exercise, but also to see possibility of all these 4 countries to work together. Now, as far as India is concerned, let us just quickly see the background and the baggages that we have with these countries. As far as Israel is concerned, right from the time it became a state in 1948, India found it extremely difficult to give it a legal recognition. And for many years, we dodged from the idea of recognizing Israel. It is only during the then Prime Minister Narasimha Rao's time that India finally gave due acknowledgement to Israel. However, the relations did not reach a second stage or an upgraded level. So, under the leadership of the present Prime Minister Shri Narendra Modi, India has made outreach to Israel, and both the countries today enjoy much cordial, much friendly relation. As far as trade between both the states is concerned, we annually trade somewhere to the tune of 6 billion US dollar. Now, with the other country, that is UAE, it is interesting to note that UAE is the 3rd largest trading partner for India. So annually, as things stand in 2021, we do an foreign trade of somewhere around $60 billion with UAE. So that's quite an interesting figure. An important partner is what UAE is to India. Now, India independently always found it difficult to negotiate with UAE and with Israel independently. Now, with this Abraham Accord and America being there, India has suddenly got facilitated, and this entire mechanism is proving to be very advantageous for India, not only in terms of economic engagements, but also to meet its geostrategic interest in the region. Now, why I brought these issue of new Quad concept is just to bring in other outlook that perhaps the paradigm shift has gone to Indo-Pacific, but there are occurrences which are there in the other regions of the world, which show that America is completely not abdicated itself. They are present. Probably the focus level today, which is there in Indo-Pacific region, is comparatively more. Now, let us see why this focus has finally come to Indo-Pacific region and to this intensity. Well, to begin with, in 2012, when Xi Jinping became the president of China, people assumed world over that he would continue with the policy which were in place as far as China was concerned, and the policy was of silent rise, that the Chinese would quietly engage in economic activities, not disturbing much of the geostrategical balance. However, the moment Xi Jinping was in power, some radical changes were witnessed within China, as well as their international posturing became a little stronger. Xi Jinping came up with the Belt Road Initiative in 2012. and it became a pilot project for the government of China to ensure that its economic capacity and capability were witnessed by the world. Today, as things stand, China is, having trade relations with nearly 140 countries. So, in a way, you can say China is like a salt. No matter what dish you may prepare, there is a little sprinkle of China everywhere. And where it is today, it is an economy which has got $3 trillion as its foreign reserve. Now, a point is, why is the world rushing with this change and focus to Indo-Pacific region? Well, there is a reasonable amount of geoeconomics involved. Let me just briefly talk of the consequences of economic issues. As things stand in 2021, China is an economy of 17 trillion. Now, Xi Jinping has laid a target for China that by 2030, the Chinese economy would be somewhere close to $30 trillion. Now, just keep these figures in mind. They will make you understand the gravity and the reason of this focus. So they intend to become an economy from 17 trillion US to an economy of 30 trillion US dollar by 2030. The international, analysts and World Bank agrees that if China continues with a GDP growth of 4 to 5%, these targets are reasonably achievable. Now, let us see what happens with US. US in 2021 is an economy at $21 trillion. By 2028, by all means and assessment, the Chinese are going to overtake the American economy. Now, if that happens, obviously there are ramifications in terms of their global say, their international posturing, and also their geostrategy. So they are with this limited bracket in which they need to reboot their foreign policy, reboot their geostrategy, look into issues which, if not control China, but definitely create an alternative power balance. So that is why this focus is coming to Indo-Pacific region. Now, talking of India, we are all aware that the previous year's Galwan issue brought very, drastically low phases of bilateral relations between India and China. So, immediate reaction was that the government of India banned a lot of, digital applications of China, and a larger majority in India perceived that, we have taken a reasonably hard stand against China and we have given a befitting reply. But probably the figures are speaking a little different story. When we look at the bilateral trade, China happens to be the largest partner in India. This year, the trade between both the countries is touching 90 billion US dollars, which is much, much higher than last year figures. And the trade deficit is working in favor of China. Ironically, what we import from China comprises around 60% of technologically driven products. That's something which must be noted. And what we export to China is more of raw materials. So it's almost like a modern colonial, setup with China is done. And it's not done only with India. It is trying to do this same module with many other countries around the world. But having said so, the government of India has taken due notice and, the countermeasures or the balancing acts are in place. For instance, our reliance on semiconductors and chip on China was reasonably high. Today, India is negotiating and exploring the option of finding countries like Taiwan, South Korea, and much in the Europe as negotiating partners to fill up this gap, so that we don't have, too deep a predilection towards China as far as technology dependency is concerned. So these are some developments, not alarming, but definitely which need to be marked. Now, As far as another big cover which was supposed to be there in the geo-economics was Trans-Pacific Partnership. So during the Trump administration, the entire efforts of the Obama administration was put to cold shelf, and there was nothing which was further to be done in Trans-Pacific Partnership. Now, Trans-Pacific Partnership was an arrangement by which many countries would have come together, which are geographically located closer to China, and make some model which would counterbalance Chinese growth. Now, with the Biden administration in US, people have again started talking of the Trans-Pacific Partnership to again becoming a central focus of the government of America. There are quite likeliness that something of this engagement may take place in the near future, but perhaps the exact model may not be replicated. One more interesting observation is that as far as China is concerned, last month, rather in the month of August, China had approached and asked, shown their willingness to be a party and a partner in the Trans-Pacific, arrangement. So, how do you counter such things in an international level? To debar a country into such grouping is a challenging thing, which today America has to look into. Well, now, how does China see the world is a very important thing. Why I placed this map, I would theoretically put certain facts into place. When geopolitics as a word was coined in 1899, there were two important tools at hand to work on your geopolitics. One was the maritime, and the second was the heartland theory. So meaning that either use the oceans for expansion or use the land to go for expansion. So as far as China is concerned, much of its engagement in terms of its geopolitics and supporting its geostrategy have been maritime driven. Their focus has been to average tune of 70 to 30% in comparison when they go for sea and the land arrangements. So that's how China sees the world. And that is how it develops a relationship with many nations in its neighborhood. So we'll just quickly go through the economic, arrangements which it has been able to develop and how countries have developed their own strategy to deal with China. Talking about, say, countries like Laos and Cambodia. Initially, when the BRI projects were being offered, Laos and Cambodia were the early recipients of a lot of Chinese loans and projects. Today, as things stand, 25% of the GDP spending of these countries is to repay the Chinese debt. So they are massively into the Chinese debt, and they do not know how to get out of it. And they have been flagged in the category of red nations, and it is a issue of major concern for financial organizations world over, that how would these nations move ahead. Now, the next country is Philippines. In 2014, a decision of the International Court of Arbitration came in favor of Philippines regarding their claim over certain islands in the South China Sea, where there were counter claims by the Chinese. However, after bilateral talks, Philippines, in a way, forgoed those claims and those rights. In the last few years, the president of Philippines has shown his allegiance towards the Chinese, and a lot of foreign investments, the Chinese investments have come to Philippines. But under this model, the Philippines has completely disregarded any engagement with the West. So from last few years, the president of Philippines has been very vocal criticizing the West. He refused to, go and visit any of the Western nations and see any reciprocation in accordance. So this is a blatant allegiance towards the Chinese. Now, how do the Chinese see such allegiance? Experience, and the more I speak about countries, it will come out that the more allegiance a nation shows to China, the respect of that nation generally is not there. Chinese like to see nations which can look square in their eyes and find better mechanisms of negotiating. So here we have, in this same light, country like Indonesia. Now, what has happened is Indonesia has understood that as a minor power, minor nation or a minor power, they have the advantage to juxtaposition the Japanese and the Chinese. So today, when in the economic arena there are projects which Indonesia has to offer, it plays between China, Japan, and many other investing nations to see which is a better investment for the country. So because of this, China has become more competitive, and in the end, Indonesia has benefited by drawing very competitive bidding of various international level projects. So that's a different model that Indonesia has followed. Now coming to Malaysia. Malaysia was almost in the line of Philippines, and the stooges and the supplicant behavior was much there in the previous government. But today, the new government in Malaysia has cancelled a lot of Chinese contract, or they have renegotiated much of these contracts. So we see a little more assertive manner of dealing with the Chinese economically by Malaysia. Now coming to Vietnam. Vietnam also happens to be a communist state. So couple of years back, when the American war with Vietnam came to end, their relations with the US were very low. Over the years, Chinese have invested in Vietnam, but in 2017, the Chinese ships landed up in the coastal waters which were disputed between Vietnam and China, and laid counterclaims. Now, this didn't go too well with the Vietnamese. They not only criticized Chinese act at the bilateral level, but they also went around the international community, making this entire issue of flagging it as unacceptable. Now, the developments are to the tune that today Vietnam ports, military ports, are being utilized by the American fleets. So that is quite a development as far as Vietnam's posture against China is concerned. Now, a bit about Australia. Australia has for long been considered to be holding allegiance to the West, especially America. Now, in 2014, the Chinese premium visited Australia, and at the bilateral level, there were a huge amount of agreements signed between Australia and China, and it is felt that this is a stage 2 that both these countries have reached, and there is no going back. But in the last few years, what Australia witnessed was not only investments which were coming in from China, but a dominating, negotiation which China was trying to thrust on them. And also there was too much of intervention within Australia trying to tamper with their democratic norms. So there was a thought process that, that the national security and much of these issues are under threat. And because of the pressure of public and people in government, Australia changed its stand against China. And in 2020, it was one of the rare nations which asked for accountability of spread of COVID by the Chinese, and requested for an international investigation. Now, this kind of open criticism of China is not very well appreciated by the Chinese, because of which the trade relations have suffered between both these countries. In terms that today China has put cap over the Australian coal import. Much of the barley, much of the seafood, much of the wines which were being imported from Australia are no more being done. So there is a trade problem which is happening between China and Australia. As far as Japan is concerned, in economic terms, 23% of the trade of Japan takes place with China, and after America, China happens to be the second largest trading partner. Japan has also seen a lot of their private sectors moving into China to establish industries, and that power which Japan enjoyed for so long was slowly drifting from their hands and moving towards China. So some years back, the government of Japan realized that they need to break this trend. They need to encourage their own private sectors and foreign investments to come back to Japan, one. And secondly, they need to also ensure that the technological superiority which they have maintained for so long is retained. So this is the area of focus of Japan. However, it still continues to engage with China in terms of economics. Now, apart from these nations, what you don't see on the map are Sri Lanka, Myanmar, Maldives, Bangladesh, and Thailand. Why we are talking of all these models is that you will realize each country has developed its own model. There is no synchronization. Each has come with its own way to engage with China. As far as Sri Lanka is concerned, it's been counterbalancing between India and China. The allegiance keeps shifting depending upon who's in power, but they realize that they need to, engage both with India without offending India, and also find some space for the Chinese. As far as Myanmar is concerned, the military coup is something which did, bother China, but it has, as usual, decided not to involve itself into the political equations within the country, but it continues to make its investment in Myanmar. As far as Maldives is concerned, there is a huge amount of financial investments which China promised to Maldives. And with Indian incentives given to Maldives, there has been a certain amount of counterbalancing which has been done. Now, as far as Bangladesh is concerned, this nation has done fairly well in last decade. In terms of when you look at the GDP figures, they are pretty encouraging, and it shows quite a promise in terms of economic development as far as Bangladesh is concerned. So, like Indonesia, they are also looking for investments from countries like Japan, South Korea, China, India, and many more. So they are more open to interact with various countries, but their dependency on China is not complete. So that's another way in which a nation is moving. Having said so, let us now come to geostrategy per se. Now, as you are all aware, China has been laying claims on the South China Sea. Now, these claims were in existence even during Chiang Kai-shek's time, when the Communist Party did not come to power under Mao Zedong. Even that time, China did propagate the idea of 9 dashed line, the inner dashed line and the outer dashed line. Inner reflected in yellow, and the pink one is the outer one. So there were many countries which had counterclaims in these territories. So this has been an issue of concern, specifically in the region where you have Parasil and the Spratly Islands. So you would very frequently, come to hear through news channels and the newspapers that the Chinese fishermen boats and their coast guard have intervened into the territorial waters of many nations, and there's a counter mechanism being put in place. So there is a lot of activities which are taking place of encroachment, posturing. Now, with all this, what has happened is all smaller nations in this region, and even big country like China, they have accelerated the process of arms procurement. So what has happened is, with rising spending on defense, the chances of collateral triggering becomes high, because any occurrence of incident in sea sometimes may drastically change into major engagement. So that is a threat which has suddenly increased over the last few years, and it's a case of worry. As far as China is concerned, it has changed its stand on the 9 dash line. Today, what China talks is of 4 sha. Now, this new concept is basically stealing a leaf from the international rule book. So today, rather than claiming their territorial rights over lines, they are talking of islands. And when they talk of islands, the associated territorial waters is also what they stake claims over. In bargain, with these four shahs, what has happened is the entire area of South China Sea has been claimed, but the claim is as per the Western standard, and the claim is more, logically being projected by the Chinese. So this is how China has made its case at the international level regarding its stake in this region, which is supposedly quite rich in terms of oil and natural gas. Now, apart from this, Taiwan is one issue which China intends to resolve as early as it can. So the statements of Xi Jinping, which have been out from last few months, have been with an aggressive posture. He has, as I quote, said that all means may be utilized to ensure that Taiwan is integrated with China. So even the military option has not been ruled out. Now, on October 1st, during the National Day of China, the Raising National Day of China, 156 air intrusions were made in the airspace of Taiwan. Now, that was a very strong message that the Chinese PLA sent to Taiwan. And there were major concerns within Taiwan regarding this aggressive behavior of China. And not only did it catch the attention of Taiwan, but it also drew attention of the Americans. Now, what happened at the diplomatic level, the last bilateral talks between US and China didn't go too well. So with this air intrusions taking place, US agreed to engage with China bilaterally, and the process of talks has already been initiated with conferences taking place in Switzerland. Now that is one part of the engagement. On the second part, what has happened in the last 2 weeks, the American engagement in Taiwan has increased. And what is being said is that America is exploring the option of providing not only defense mechanism to Taiwan, but also generating options in case if a conflict, conventional conflict takes place with China. And the last week presentation by the Pentagon to the White House stated that in case America does decide to engage or get involved with this conflict of Taiwan-China, then the chances are that the war may not go much in favor of United States. So that is how things are, probably not at war level, but definitely there are tensions which exist in this area of Indo-Pacific. Now, the next issue is China-Japan dispute of Senkaku Islands. Now, this island was under private ownership, and then the state took over. The moment it came under Japanese claim, there was a counter claim by the Chinese. Now, this is one issue which has been a major bickering problem between both these states, and this has seen more military posturing between both the countries. Now, let us go back into Japanese past. After the Second World War, their active forces in terms of military posturing were put down, and their armed forces were just left to and restricted to a defensive force mechanism. But with these frequency increase of such conflicts, in 2012, Japan made an amendment in its constitution, and the empowerment of its navy from then and its defense forces has increased. Now, as things stand, Japan is spending reasonably high figures of its GDP on its defense. Now, apart from this particular occurrence, there is another issue which happened. During the Trump administration, there were messages being sent by America that probably with times to come, America may not provide Japan with the security umbrella which it enjoys. And if it is still provided, there will be a cost to pay. Now, because of these messages, the Japanese understood and realized that they need to make themselves reasonably self-independent or dependent in terms of handling these issues. Because China to one is an issue which is related and restricted to this island. More important is the issue of North Korea. Now, as things stand, the North Korean missiles cover Japan. In last 1 year, many of the missile tests have demonstrated North Korea's capability to fire missiles over Japan. So, Japanese have been doing their protective drills, which are anti-missile drills. They have the US troops stationed in Japan. So there are a lot of activities within Japan which shows a change in approach from non-military engagements to a little hardening stand towards having more military capacity, which will have ramifications overall in the Indo-Pacific region. Now, barring these countries which are geographically located, we have countries like UAE, which is interested in this region. You have UK interested in this region. You even have Russia, which definitely has land affiliation to this Indo-Pacific region, now taking more, military demonstrative activities within this region. And of course, India. As far as India is concerned, our naval presence over the last 10 years has increased. So it is very frequent for the Indian Navy to peacefully visit ports in Myanmar, in Malaysia, Indonesia, Philippines, and many such like nations. So, and we also participate in various other bilateral level exercises. Apart from the Indian Navy, even the Indian Coast Guard is very active to look for bilateral level engagements with various powers in this region. So by and large, there is a huge amount of military and geostrategic activities of posturing which are taking place, especially in the areas which have got straits which limit the movement of accessibility within this region and out of this region. So these are very interesting happenings. Now, as far as associations are concerned, we very well talk about Quad first. So Quad was with a background that somewhere in 1992, United States and India decided to get together and do Malabar exercise, primarily considering the fact that this region of Indo-Pacific was prone to, disasters. 70% of the world disasters do take place in this region. So there was more focus towards having joint training between the forces, the naval forces of US and India. And they started a Malabar exercise. By early 2000, you had Singapore, you had Japan, you had Australia, who were also interested and participated in some manner. But 2007, this participation further increased, and by 2015, Japan formally joined this grouping. Now, Australia was not officially partner to the Quad. So there were much talks between 2015 to 20 whether Australia should join, its consequences and other things. So they didn't want to offend their Chinese friends, which they had a lot of engagements in terms of economic activities. But finally, in 2020, Australia decided to be part of this Quad. Now, as far as the Quad partners are concerned, they feel and they do propagate the idea that this is not an organization which is looking to counterbalance China or threaten China. But the message is well understood by the Chinese. They do understand that this coalition of major powers is taking place to counterbalance their activities in the Indo-Pacific region. For example, the freedom of movement at the sea, that's one thing which has been flagged by Quad, and because of the intervention which China has been doing in the South China Sea, they are a counterbalance to all that. Now, one more thing which happened last month, in the month of September, was the declaration of AUKUS. Now, what is AUKUS? It is in military tie-up, or it's a journal tie-up. Well, it started with submarines, so a lot of thought process went that it's a military affiliation, but it's a much wider grouping. Now, what has happened is Australia realized that its allegiance with the West needs to be further, increased, especially in a case where their relations with China were not going so well. So, as far as the security requirements were concerned, they had an agreement in 2016 with France to have diesel-based submarines, diesel-supplied submarines. So that was being catered for. But then Australia approached UK and then approached through UK, America, to provide them nuclear-empowered submarines. Now, why this grouping? Well, it is important to go back into the history. In 1958, America made concession for one country, that is UK, and transferred the nuclear submarine power-driven submarine facility to UK. Now, today, these both countries jointly can produce nuclear-powered submarines. So, with this agreement, Australia will get nuclear-powered 7 submarines over a period of time, which will be jointly made by Australia and US. UK and US. So that's how this grouping has come. As far as the other aspects of the grouping are concerned, they have shown their commitment to work towards development of artificial intelligence, quantum computing, cyber, security. So there are many other security angles which have come with AUKUS. Now, this entire thing seems to posture in a manner which makes China uncomfortable. So, have the Chinese been quiet or working solely? Well, it is not so. Just a week prior, China and Russia had a joint naval exercise in which they decided to go very close to the territorial waters of Japan. There is an island with the name of Honshu, which is in the northern region of China. So both these fleets of both these countries went almost close to this island through these straits. So have they been doing joint exercises? Yes. Both these countries have been exercising in the Sea of Japan as well as in the Arctic region. But this was the first time they've gone so close, aligning themselves to the Japanese, territorial waters. So what troubles Japan is that if it is being done once, perhaps this may happen more frequently. So these are some of the concerns of Chinese, government as well as the other powers which are in this region, and that is how the geostrategy is shifting in this region. And in the coming months and years ahead, we are going to see a lot of accelerated level developments. Now, when we talk of India, which I have not spoken for a few minutes, is India happens to be geography. Which I've been emphasizing from the very start. Geography keeps it aligned with China. So we are neighbors. Now, this kind of an equation is not there with Australia. It is not there with UK. It is not there with US. So India happens to have geography with China. We share land borders. Having that factor is something which India cannot avoid. Our forces will be committed for the security and sovereignty of our land territory, which is important. However, there is a larger game for India to play, not only in the Indian Ocean, but perhaps in the entire Indo-Pacific region. To justify the term coined Indo-Pacific, which prior was called Asia-Pacific. So when it is now Indo-Pacific, definitely as a rising power, this is not where we need to restrict, we need to go wider. So this is where India is to come. This is the international expectations from India, and that is the level in which we need to pitch. So with this, I come to the end of my talks, and I would be very happy to take any questions related to my topic.
Thank you, sir. Thank you very much for your elaborative lecture on different aspects of Indo-Pacific region. And really, it is an enlightening talk by Dr. Mohit Nayal ji. And sir has been talking about the various things related to Indo-Pacific region and related to China, and you have taken us to America. You have made us to understand the situation going on at Afghanistan. And in your lecture, you have tried to touch upon the various the aspects of Indo-Pacific region over the past decade and how it has gained a lot of in terms of not only economic things but also security aspects. The lecture is very useful to the students and scholars of multidisciplinary nature, and especially those who are working with international relations and also the various issues, various researches. Now I announce that the lecture is open for discussion, queries, clarification. As Professor, as Dr. Mohit Nayal ji is here to clear your doubts. It's open for discussion. Dear participants, it's over to you.
Dr. Nageshwar, I think I'm happy that yeah, perhaps the message or the communication I was trying to make didn't trigger too much of thought process or challenging ideas. So I think I take it that I was able to do justice to the talks, and there were less questions or queries. Having said that, on a lighter sense, in case if there are any questions, I would love to take them on, even on a later stage through mail or anything. I would be open for that. That card is always open. Yeah.
Yes, it's open for discussion. Any one of you on YouTube or Google Meet. It's open for clarification. And Dr. Nayaji is with us. You can respond with him directly. Dear participants, if you want to talk, interact with our research person, Sir is with us. Very happy to share his ideas with you. You can switch on your video and audio. I can interact with Sir. Yes, sir, I think that you have clarified all the doubts so that the participants are not coming up with the doubts, because the amount of the information that you have given to them very interesting, and it is not like a routine type of lecturing. You have touched upon the various aspects with the realistic things and a new look towards the international relations.
Thank you so much.
Shamil, do you find any questions on YouTube? Please check it once.
No, sir.
Yeah, please.
Sir, we find no questions on YouTube.
No questions?
Yes, sir.
Yes.
Good afternoon, sir. Thank you, Director OUCIP, for bringing this talk onto this platform. Really a thought-provoking and enlightened lecture. We are unable to catch you where you are speaking. You have touched cultural as well as the economic and political aspects of Indo-Pacific region. We are unable to catch you, sir. You are revolving around all the countries because we do not have that much knowledge to catch you. Hope this is uh, our this is we are unable to understand actually about international relations. That's why we are unable to ask a questions. If it was a literature, we would have asked we would have participated in a good debate. Anyhow, this is a very enlightened lecture, which I have been following all the lectures.
Thank you. Thank you so much for your comments. Thank you.
Thank you, enlightened lectures.
Thank you.
Yes. Now it's my part in the formal vote of thanks to the this session, and I'm very happy to listen to you, sir. As part of the lecture series, we have conducted 22 lectures. This is 23rd lecture so far, and almost all the lectures were delivered by academicians uh, in various fields in their respective areas. But though you are not from the university teacher, not you are not a professor, but equal to a university professor, you have delivered your goods to the scholars, the students, and here some of them are teachers working at degree colleges and even at central universities. Madhavi is working as government lecturer, and Mr. Dr. Tirupati Reddy is working as assistant professor at Central University, EFLU. And even I'm sure that this lecture goes well on YouTube because the amount of ideas that you have delivered are very precious. In academia, as part of the regular books, we may not find those valuable deliberations. In spite of your busy schedule, you have taken a lot of risk to deliver the lecture. I know how difficult it is to get the formal permission from the authorities to deliver on such a crucial things since you are at defense. So that I know I can understand how much know hard work or how much efforts you have taken, your strong desire of delivering a lecture made you, sir, to take such type of risk. I am very happy to to associate with you on this occasion. And the OUCIP, Usman University Center for International Programs, and never forget your services. Of course, the university, Usman University, is thinking that to establish Indo-Pacific Center at Usman University. Our Honorable Vice Chancellor has met the foreign embassy and also for officials at the central government, and even the central government has accepted to establish a separate center for Pacific Studies at Usman University, and I have informed the same to our Honorable Vice Chancellor yesterday about your lecture. Sir was very happy yesterday, and he was also curious to know about this. I'm sure that this lecture will be forwarded to our Honorable Vice Chancellor. As he came from the political science background, Sir is curious about this specific area of Indo-Pacific region and security issues. Thank you very much, sir. Your time and enlightening thoughts and your areas that are not covered so far. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. It was an honor, and I'm sure we will have more interactions in the near future. Thank you so much. Thank you.